So I'm going to give you a sort of ethnography 101, if you like, an introduction to ethnography, and some conversation analysis, which I threw in at the last minute because I was thinking many of you are doing projects which are around chatbots and things like that, and so obviously CA becomes a useful method. And then if I have time, I'm going to give you a couple of example projects to show the relevance of this to AI. So, leaping right in, what's ethnography and why does it matter? Okay, ethnography is an anthropological method. So originally, anthropologists went and lived with tribes for maybe 6 months, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, to really understand what was going on in those places. And this is one of my favorite cartoons. It's the systematic study and recording of human culture. And it really it's the naturalistic study of human behavior. And there's going to be some things that I emphasize through this talk, and naturalistic is one, and then the other big one that I'm going to bang on about is observation. Okay? Ethnography employs a set of methods for understanding the world as it happens. This isn't about doing experiments or user tests or anything like that. This is about or interviews, actually. This is about going into the world and seeing what's happening out in the world as it happens. You're looking at naturally occurring behavior, natural habitats and communities, and natural use of tools, artifacts, and devices. So, why am I banging on so much about natural and observation? Okay, it is really, really, really important. And Margaret Mead, who's a very famous anthropologist, sums it up in one of my favorite quotes as well. There's almost no presentation I give which doesn't have this quote in it somewhere. Okay, it's like what people say, what people do, and what they say they do are entirely different things. And it is really, really true. And this is really important to remember. This doesn't mean that other data collection methods aren't useful. It's just you have to understand the limitations of them, and you choose the method that is same for data testing and testing of applications. When you've built something and you want to try it out, you use the methods that's appropriate for that situation. And I'll say now, because I don't really talk about user testing at all in this presentation, but when we do user testing, we try and do it as naturalistically as possible, given whatever state the artifact you're testing is in. So usually it's fairly unnatural. You still try and go to the setting where people are, but you might have paper, you might have a PowerPoint on a phone or something like that. Later on, it gets more and more natural as you have something that's working and you can actually put it in the hands of the users and see them use it. So, from anthropology to work practice studies or ethnomethodologically informed ethnography. Okay? The type of ethnography that I do, if I went to an anthropology conference and said, hey, I'm an ethnographer, look at one of my studies, they would all gasp. And they would be like, how can that possibly be ethnography? Because I'm not spending 2 years in the field. You can't possibly spend 2 years in the field if you're doing technology design. By the time I've come back from the field with lots of great insights about what people do, they would have been on about the 4th iteration of the technology, would have been released to the public, sold or not sold. Okay? If you want to influence the systems design life cycle, you have to do things much more rapidly. And that's why these things called work practice studies came about. They use the natural observational methods of anthropology to inform systems design, and they use it in so one of the things that's obvious is you have a much shorter cycle, and the way that we can get away with this is that we have a much more constrained setting. An anthropologist is trying to understand all the workings of a tribe. You know, Margaret Mead, for example, looked at adolescence in various tribes around the world. You can't look at adolescence in 3 weeks. Adolescence is something that takes place over a number of years. You have to spend the time there. You really have to get deeply involved and understand all the aspects and how people look after children and what happens during adolescence and what happens when you're an adult. Luckily, we're usually designing for much more constrained settings, often for the workplace, but also it can be for the home, or it can be for entertainment, or it might be for communication. And so we do much more focused studies. So a typical ethnography might be 3 weeks long. It might be 8 weeks long if you're looking at some really complicated process. There's not a time that I can tell you, go out and look for 3 weeks. It depends on the setting. You know, if you're looking at something very constrained like call centers, which is something I'll talk about, I refer to a lot in this presentation, because it's one of the places where AI and chatbots, everyone's getting very excited about them. And I've spent quite a lot of time studying call centers. But one of the things about call centers is within a couple of weeks, if you're sitting with different agents for 2 or 3 hours with each agent, you've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. Because the calls are coming in and they're coming in and they're coming in and they're dealing with like hundreds of calls a day. So you get a pretty good idea. So obviously the really unusual ones you're not going to see, but you've got a pretty good idea what you need to be designing for. And that's important because designers are not going to wait for you and developers are not going to wait for you. And in your case, you probably want to go out and do some quick studies and like try and understand what's going on in the world. Anthropology also really emphasizes the understanding of culture. It's about trying to understand what's going on. Work practice studies are about understanding, but it's about understanding typically to inform change. Okay, so there were lots of debates in the early days when work practice studies were being introduced and started to be used in the workplace about whether we had any right, so I'm an ethnomethodologist, whether we had any right, because ethnomethodology is definitely not about changing the environment. Okay, it's about understanding what's going on now. So is it ethnomethodology if you're going to do something that's to inform change? So that's why we use the very long, complicated, ethnomethodologically informed ethnographies, because we're saying we're using the methods, we're using the philosophy from ethnomethodology, but we're doing something that an ethnomethodologist, again, would say, well, this isn't ethnomethodology because you're trying to design something, you're trying to build something. And it's interesting, it turns out to be a really useful method in the design process. So in a HCI, which I would say is my discipline, human-computer interaction, and CSCW, computer-supported cooperative work, it's really, really took off. It's really, really common to use these ethnographies. But also process redesign and consultancy. You find ethnographers in hospitals, okay? Studying, and they're not trying to build technology, they're trying to improve processes. So one place you can get a job as an ethnographer, for example, is in a mental health institution where they want to understand what's going on, do they need to change their processes, what are the best ways to treat the patients from a non-medical stance, because obviously it's holistic care of your mental health patient in an institute. So you find ethnographers in the strangest of places. And consultancy also, the one thing is typically consultants have an even stricter timeline than their systems design people, so the ability to use much ethnography there is a bit constrained. However, I've been involved with consultancy projects, so I'll talk briefly about one of them. I'll use an example from one. And then this is really important, because we call them work practice studies, then people think they can only be about work. But the work that we're using, the way we're using work, is an ethnomethodological way of using work. So as I'm talking to you, I'm doing work. The work that I'm doing, so I'm doing work for Microsoft, obviously, that's traditional type of work, but the work that I'm doing is trying to get you to understand why ethnography is important, okay? And I'm trying to make sure that you understand my utterances. And so that's the other use of work. So work here, any activity, leisure, play, daily life, we construct the social world around us. And that's the work that we're doing, and that's the work that ethnomethodology uncovers. And when we're talking about work practice studies, that's what we're talking about. Those are the practices we're trying to uncover. So why ethnography? Many people, particularly people who are trying to design stuff, say, why would I do ethnography? The thing that I'm building doesn't exist yet. How can possibly understanding what people do now, how can that possibly help me? Because the thing I'm going to build is going to change what they do. Okay? That's a fair point, except that all technologies are made at home in the world. So this quote from Harvey Sachs, who's a conversational analyst, is a very nice one. The technical apparatus is then being made at home with the rest of our world. And that's the thing that's routinely being done. And it's the source of the failures of technocratic dreams, that if only we introduce some fantastic new communication machine, the world will be transformed. Whereas what happens is the object is made at home in the world that has whatever organisation it already has. That's my emphasis, I should say, not his. Okay? This doesn't mean that your technology does not change the world. Okay? It doesn't mean that it doesn't change practices. But if you think about, say, the telephone, okay? Now, I can talk to someone on the other side of the world. Now we have mobile phones. I can talk to my friend while I'm walking down the street. I no longer have to arrange a specific time and place where I'm going to meet them and then stand there for half an hour while they don't turn up, like I used to have to do when I was a kid when we didn't have mobile phones. Okay? So it has changed practice, but has it changed communication? Not really. We still argue, we still joke, we still discuss, we still laugh. Okay, the fundamental practices of communication remain the same. And so what he's really saying here is not that there's no change. Of course things change, but when you look at practice in the large, the change you make is quite small. We don't have, social media, for example, and I was amusing myself before this presentation looking up some studies on social media and particularly journalists' comments about it when it was just starting out. We can now, in theory, have friends anywhere in the world that we can talk to anytime we want. Okay? Has that brought world peace? Not when I last looked. Okay? And there were lots of people who suggested that it might when it first came out. But the whole point is, it's made at home. Social media is made at home in the world we already have. And so, if you're going to design technology for that world, it really helps if you know what that world's like. Okay? So truly useful technology supports and enhances natural human capabilities and practices. It's artfully integrated with practice. So it's a really good idea to know what that practice is if you're going to introduce something to support it. And this, I would say, is important anywhere, but it's particularly important in workplace technologies if you're building something for the workplace, if you're building something for workers to use, because you want them to use it to get their work done, okay? And typically, people will not use things that don't work. Why would you? If it's going to disrupt my job, I'm going to work around it. And we see that again and again. And the failure of technology, many technology projects, is because they don't actually support the work that they're meant to be supporting. And this is often because they've been designed with what the manager thought the work was. And we'll go back to that in a short bit. But the other reason for ethnography is what you think is the problem almost never is the problem. Okay? This is a lovely picture from the Department of Work and Pensions in the UK where I did a study. That was the one that was linked with the consultants. We did it hand in hand with the consultants who were working with the DWP. They wanted to remove paper from their processes. You can see they have a problem with paper. They have a storage facility which is the size of 9 football pitches from floor to ceiling, packed with these boxes of people's claims for unemployment benefit and sickness benefit. If you can imagine trying to find anything in there, it's an absolute nightmare, and it costs them a ton of money. And they didn't want to build another storage facility. So they came to us and they said, we want to know why people are using paper. Because we want to remove paper. We don't want to spend all this money storing paper. We have all these computer systems. People are still using paper, and they're using paper because that's their culture, because that's their practice, because they're resistant to change. So we don't want to mess everything up by just removing the paper. If you can come and do a study and tell us what's going on and how we can change the culture and how we can help them change, then we can remove the paper without disrupting the workflow. So they very clearly articulated the problem as being one of resistance to change by the staff and just habit. Okay? We went in and we found out that paper is the glue that holds the whole system together. Okay? They have lots of computer systems. Some of them from the 1970s, some of them from 2000s. They don't talk to each other. They can't talk to each other properly. So people end up printing stuff out and carrying it around so they can enter it into the next computer system. Okay? If you just remove paper, the whole thing would fall apart. So we showed them that they had to totally redesign and re-architect their computer system. So what you think is the problem, it almost never is. Okay? And even if you have an idea of a bit of the problem, are you sure that it's the most important bit of the problem? And even more importantly, are you sure it's what the users think is the problem? I think that one of the biggest failures for, say, ICTD, Information Communication Technology for Development, is that it might be solving a real problem, a healthcare problem, for example, but it's not one that I, as a user, is my biggest concern. So am I going to put the extra effort into using the system that you have built to me when it's not my priority? And there have been many papers that have written, well, the problem is you've got low literacy, you've got people who are technologically unwilling to use technology. But as Indrani will testify, when it's technology for entertainment, people very quickly learn how to use it, okay? And with the auto rickshaw drivers who I've been working with, when they thought Ola was going to give them extra jobs, they were very happy to adopt it, even though they never used a smartphone before. And then when they found out it wasn't giving them more jobs, they dropped it. So people are willing to use technology if it solves their problem, but quite often you're not solving their problem. And that's a really important thing to know, and that's one thing that ethnography can help you with. What do the people on the ground care about? So ethnography is not, I'm going to be a little bit negative now, just interviewing some people, okay? It's not. That's an interview study. That's fine. It's not ethnography. Ethnography has to have some observation in. And the reason for that, I've already mentioned. Margaret Mead sums it up so nicely. But people can't, so particularly when you're doing systems design, so interviewing is very useful, and we do interview people, and it is useful to understand what their concerns are. But what people can't tell you, and what's really important when you're doing technology design, is the minutiae, the small things, all the tiny things they do in their daily work or their daily lives that they take for granted, that your system is potentially going to come and mess up, but should be supporting. And so it's really important to actually watch them, because if you ask someone what you do in your day, or what do you do in that process, well, I give that document. I give that document to that guy. So there's a nice information flow model that says the information flows from here to here with some boxes and some arrows to make it look very professional. But if you actually follow someone around, there's different ways of passing information. You might put it in someone's in tray. You might leave it on their desk. Or you might go to leave it on their desk, they're not there, you go away with it in your hand, you go to leave it on their desk, they are there, you put it on their desk and you catch their eye. And then you walk away. That catching their eye is really important. That says this document is an important document and you have accepted it now. Those other ones that I just did that with, they weren't so important. That wasn't so urgent. That didn't matter so much. But if you've got a simple information flow diagram, it all looks the same. It's definitely not asking the manager what people do in the workplaces. And I have some people sitting in the back there working on my auto driver project who might laugh at that right now. Asking managers is not a very effective way of knowing what's going on. Managers do not know what their workers do, okay? They know the process, they know the end result, but they have no idea how the workers achieve it. And typically, you have your processes, and then there's all the things that workers do to make those processes actually work, that are workarounds, and managers can't tell you those. Okay, so if you ask the manager, you get a completely false view of what's going on. And that is actually where I've seen many studies using more formal methods fail, because they do, we get the manager to give us a walkthrough. And because he gives you a walkthrough, you think it's right, but actually, of course, it isn't, because he's telling you what they should be doing, not what they actually are doing. My favourite one. It is not ad hoc anecdotes about when you did something once, okay? I've been looking at Ola Auto rickshaw drivers, Ola and Uber cabs, The amount of times I present and someone goes, oh, but I got an auto once and this happened. And you're like, yes, I'm not saying I don't believe you. Of course it happened. But that's not the same as studying people for a period of time and seeing their range of practices. The fact that you don't like auto rickshaw drivers doesn't trump a systematic empirical data gathering study of auto rickshaw drivers. Okay? And it's not something that anyone can just do. Okay? You need to learn the skills. Actually, well, I'll say this in the next slide, I think. Ethnography is, to be a bit more positive, it's a set of structured methods for understanding the world. It's the production of empirical data. And one of the things that we as ethnomethodological ethnographers would emphasize is not just what the world looks like. So that's what we call a scenic description of the world, which just says how things are organized, what it looks like. It's how it comes to look like that. And actually, when you're doing design, both of these are important. What the world looks like is important, and the underlying mechanisms it comes to look like that are important. And it's a skill built up over time. So data collection is actually something you can learn pretty quickly. With a little bit of apprenticeship, maybe read some papers. I've actually instructed people over the phone on how to do ethnography. A couple of rounds of feedback on the type of data they're collecting. That's pretty good. Data analysis, however, is a whole nother thing. Data analysis takes years of practice and years of training. So how do I do ethnography? So first of all, you have to go out into the world. Offices, classrooms, call centers, celebrating, cooking, banking, in the field, on the road, at the station, wherever you care about. And then these ones, chat rooms, virtual worlds, forums. You can do ethnography in the virtual world as well, if that's your site of interest. So it's seeing what people do as they do it. It's understanding the details and contingencies of actual practice. And the idea is to capture people's tacit knowledge. So what people can't tell you they do. They know it, but they're not going to tell you about it. And then this one's also important, to witness trouble as it naturally arises. And there are things that we call normal natural troubles. So these are the things that you encounter all the time and you just don't think about because you have a workaround now. And then there's things that are troubles that really are big troubles. But what's important when you're designing technology is normal natural troubles are as important as the big troubles. And sometimes if your system can address the normal natural troubles, the things that we don't even think about anymore, you've actually massively improved people's lives. So to give you an example, I'm using the new PowerPoint slide design thing. Okay, in this presentation, not on this particular slide. Okay, it puts pictures in funny, fancy frames and nice ways and organizes the stuff. But it doesn't do that if there's any animation on the slide. So one of the things that I do without really thinking about it is I'll create a new slide with just the frame. I will get the thing to do the design for me, and then I'll add my text from the other slide back into that one. That's a normal natural trouble. That's something I just do because that's the only way I can get it to cut the pictures for me in the right way. If I didn't have to do that, that would be fantastic. So these are actually important things. But people can generally not tell you about them unless they're reflecting on them. And then this is like a little how-to. So if you want to go and do some studies, there's different things you can look at. So you can follow a person around. And you may want to do, one thing I should say is you may want to do a combination of these things depending on what you care about. So you shadow someone. You basically just follow them around while they're doing whatever they're doing. You may go and observe a particular location. So I've stood in supermarkets, we've stood in stations. When we were doing a study of cash payments, we went and stood in the station and in some supermarkets by the tills to understand what paying looked like. And then you're observing lots of people paying. It may be object-oriented. You may follow a document or an artifact. So in that study of the Department of Work and Pensions, I followed an unemployment case all the way through from call centre to the money being paid out, not to the end of its life, I should say. And activity-oriented, you may follow a particular activity. So, for example, one thing that people are thinking about doing chatbots for is, organising a business trip. Can I have a chatbot? Or, Facebook now says, is this a plan? I don't know if you've seen that popping up in your messenger when you're like... So if you want to design something for planning, it would be a good idea to follow people doing planning and different types of planning. Or if you want to do something to help you book a plane, then follow people or organise a business trip. Then see what people actually do now. Both people who are professional, so your PA, those type of people, and people who are non-professional, how do they do it? And we do, yes?
How do you document the observations? Because if it is like virtual, then you can have a trail of chat or all the activities. But when you are shadowing somebody, how do you document?
So it really depends on the setting and the granularity of the data that you need. So I always take field notes. That's my first thing. So I have my notebook and my pen, and you just write everything down. Usually, I also do audio recording. So I just have a little audio recorder that I've clipped for myself. People are usually pretty happy with you doing that. The advantage of that is you can't take down everything. So you take down as many things as you want, and then you can play back the audio for particularly detailed parts of conversation. For you, if you're doing the CA, which we'll come to, then you need to record conversation and record interaction. Interaction might be particularly important. Next week, I'm going to go to a call center. I'm going to be doing a study of a call center where they use AI. And what I would like to do, I will be taking my notes. I will be getting recordings of all it's actually a chat call center, a typing one. I will be getting the recordings, the documentation of all the calls that I sit through, all the chats that I sit through. But what I also want to do, if they will let me, is take a screenshot, so record the screen of the person that I'm sitting with, either with a video camera, if they won't let me record on screen, but ideally recording on screen, so that I have all of that. Because in this situation, the micro interaction is really, really important. So it's important, the interaction between the agent and the customer. It's important what the bot, which is working with them, is suggesting. And it's important what other resources they use. And often, if you look at people when they're doing stuff on a computer, they do it really fast. So if these are skilled people who are answering like hundreds of calls a day. So they'll pop up a window, they'll check something, they'll go. So I'm unlikely, I certainly can't capture that all in field notes, and I'm unlikely even necessarily to see all of it in enough detail while I'm watching. So in that case, the micro-organization is really important. When we were following the auto rickshaw drivers, and we would have one driver in front of us, driving, picking up passengers, and we'll be in an auto rickshaw we'd hired to follow him, then field notes were fine. We did field notes and photographs and chatting to them. We recorded the interviews, but when we were actually doing the data, that was fine because we didn't need such micro, they're doing things it's slowing down the auto, speeding up the auto, going left or right. These are things that happen in a much slower amount of time, so you can record them. So it really depends on the situation.
So is this not a challenge, that the fact that they are being shadowed or observed might make them change their natural behavior?
So very much less than you think, and much less. So more if you're maybe looking at people in their leisure time. Less if you're looking at people at work. At work, you've still got to get your job done, okay? So you're going to do the auto driver we're following, he still has to earn his money, okay? So it means that people change less. The things that they will change, which you can't comment on, so particularly if you're, say, in an office setting, is people might look at Facebook less while you're there than they would when you're not. Okay? People might spend more time doing their actual work when you're there than they would, less of those little messing about breaks that we all take. So you can't talk. If you're doing a study and messing about breaks, you have to organize it a little bit differently. But if you're doing a study of their work, then it's okay. If you're looking at people's leisure time, that becomes much more different. It depends what it is. We follow people going shopping with their friends. Well, that's fine. They pretty much do what they normally do. And if you're a good observer, they get familiar with you. You blend into the background pretty quickly. People are a bit self-conscious at first. And it's one of the reasons I don't like to video very much, because people are much more conscious if you're walking behind them with a bloody great video recorder. And say, if have to record in the call center, it'll be the person's screen, not them, even there, because that will just make them a little bit more self-conscious. Although some people, you know, in the States, my colleagues in the States used to have great success with videoing people, but in Europe it really didn't work so well. People were very, so yes and no, I think is the answer. And, you know, for Indrani's study of people, you know, Wizard of Oz study of people talking to chatbots, or we did a study of people's media practices on their phones, you know that you're only getting half the story, because, like, there's almost no discussion of pornography, and you actually know that that's a massive part of media sharing and things like that. So it's like, or if you're talking to a chatbot, things like can go that way, but people in a study are not going to do that. So.
The chat was studied, right? Like when people were actually chatting, we didn't see a dull chat. But then in the interviews, people did talk about, you know, a chatbot being used for a dull chat or any such usage. I mean, you said that if it were deployed in the feed and then track usage, you could see it.
Yes.
You can think of my friends.
Yes. But friends. Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely.
What do you think about this? So, as an ethnographer, if you are writing this data or your observations, so it comes from your frame. So how do you take care of that frame?
So you have to go in, I guess, as neutrally as you can. There are obviously things that you see and things that you don't see. One of the things we do is ethnographers tend not to work alone very much. You tend to work in groups, even if so ideally a couple of you will go into a setting at different times, and then write up your notes, and then you question each other. We sit in these meetings where it's like it's the first stage of data analysis, but the first stage of that often takes some hours, is like understanding the setting from the perspective from all the other people there. And that's where you see different people, because different people have different perspectives, have different concerns. You know, particularly we would often do the very first stage with just ethnographers, and then the second stage we would bring in some of the technology people in our team, the developers who work with us, and then of course they bring whole nother framing because they have their technical concerns, and then that can be useful to understand what's going on there. But I have to say, one of the things that we do so what you're studying is definitely framed by your interests. So what you're even studying, you know, I'm really interested in auto rickshaw drivers. That was why I initially did the study. I wanted to understand how they reasoned and why they would turn down rides and because I know that I knew that there was some rationale for it, but I could, as a passenger previously, I could never work it out. So when I got the opportunity to work with them, I'm like, great. But then a lot of what you're doing is you're just trying to observe in as much detail as you can everything they do. So that's your first stage of data, should be a pretty good description of everything they do. Of course, there are things that they do that you may discount, and you try not to as much as you can, because actually often they become more important later on. As you go through the analysis, it's typically not the things you thought were important when you did the study, it's other things that come to light. Yeah. But this material is no more subjective than anything else. I mean, you might have all the biggest data set in the world of actual behaviors, but you have to analyze it. So you're bringing your frame then when you're doing the analysis. So, I mean, an ethnomethodologist's answer would be like, everything is subjective. So like, you just have to try and be as rigorous and empirical as you can. So ethnographic interviewing is largely unstructured or semi-structured. We try and let people tell us what matters to them as well as the things we want to find out. Because if you just go with like a very structured idea of what you want to find out, then again, it's like you projecting your idea of the problem onto them, and you might miss all the things that concern them. And we do two types of interviewing to supplement our observation. There's this open-ended interviewing, often done at the start of a project, but it can also be done in the middle. So for the auto drivers project, one of the things that we noticed was that how they were using Ola money was interesting. Because they got most of their money in cash, they were saving a bit in their Ola money. They wouldn't call it saving, but they would withdraw the money from their Ola money account from the ATM, maybe on a Monday, because Monday was when they paid their house loan and their car loan. So they didn't take it out every day, even though they got paid every day. Or some of them might keep it for a month, or some of them might keep it for even longer till they needed it. None of them called it saving, because they were just keeping it till they needed it. But somehow, because it wasn't in their hand, and they had cash in their hand, they were putting it aside. So this interested us because it's quite different from other studies of digital payment in low-income communities where your whole income is coming from digital. So we did an interview study. We interviewed 20 Peace Auto drivers to understand who were using Ola, to understand how they used Ola money. So when I say, when I have say that interviewing is not on its own, it isn't great. We use it quite a lot, but we use it to supplement observations. And interview is very useful to get at things you can't necessarily observe very easily. It's quite hard to observe people's use of Ola money. The drivers also were paying their loan by Airtel Money. We did do some observation of people paying their loan by Airtel Money, but it's quite hard again because it takes a few minutes. So you have to almost set it up, and then it becomes less naturalistic. So there are things that you can observe easily, and there's things that you can't observe very easily. And interviews are quite good for at least getting an understanding of them, but you have to take what people say in an interview with a little bit of a, it's not necessarily the same as seeing them do it. It's not that people lie to you, though. That's the thing. It's not that people lie to you. It's just that people respond. So just like I'm saying, I design my turns at talk so that I hope that you can understand, and I'm looking at your faces to make sure you can understand. Similarly, if you're interviewing someone, they are thinking, because there's many ways you can interpret anything, any question. So they are thinking, what is it the interviewer wants to know? So this isn't the same as Indrani's response bias, where that's people who are like, this is the interviewer, of course, this is the best system, and they genuinely think it. It's just a natural part of conversation. We design our turns to fit the other person. So you have to be a little bit careful about what you're asking and how you're asking. And one of the things we do with that is we get people to show us. So when we were asking drivers about what their savings were, we would then ask them, what was the last time you put some money in your bank account, and how much was it? And what's the balance in your bank account now? And that actually gave us a different picture, because many drivers are like, yeah, I'm saving. But then when you ask them, they have no rupees in there, or they last used it 4 months ago. Okay? Because and it's not because they're lying, it's just because you think, yeah, of course I'm saving. But are you? How actively? And we would do the same. Okay? And it's good for an overview of the setting, so particularly if you're going into a new place. So one of the first things I'll do in the call center next week is I'll sit down with the manager and I'll find out how the agents are organized, how the different processes are organized, who does what, where do they sit, what time do they work. And then that will help me decide who I'm going to go and sit with. And we also do in-situ interviewing, and this is absolutely essential because you will not understand everything that you see in the field. And so you need to ask people. So one of the things we did with the drivers, so we're sitting in the auto behind. In an ideal world, you would have been in the auto in front, because then you could ask him stuff. But of course, if you're in the auto in front, no one's going to hire it because it's already got someone in. So to try and get around some of the disadvantages of that is when he would stop at the traffic lights, the guy we're following, we would pull up next to him and we would ask him questions like, so where are you going to go now? And he would be like, oh, well, I could go left to the school, or I could go right to the shopping centre. There might be some people around there. Oh, but look at the traffic on the left. That's going to take me, I'm going to get really stuck there, so I'm going to go right. And so you can see that one of this is not on one example on its own, but seeing the patterns over the time, you can see that one of the things that was really important for our auto drivers is this idea of flow. You're sort of flowing through the day. We actually tracked their routes, on using one of these bike trackers, and they're insanely different. They're all doing about the same kilometers, but some are doing it, and every day is different. And it's like they're just sort of going with the flow, and they're also keeping moving, and there's this idea of momentum. And these are all things that are really important in the driver's day. And if you didn't ask them, you wouldn't know that. Okay, so what am I doing for time? I talk too much. We're to 11, aren't we? Yeah. Yep, okay. Okay, so analysis. Does anyone have any questions before
I have many questions. Can I ask them now or?
You have meta questions? No, you can't ask them at all. I don't want any meta questions in mind. No, of course you can.
I think this would be really useful for people here to kind of understand and deeply grapple with it throughout my career. The thing is this, that when you're doing an ethnographical study for technology, technologists are always in a hurry. Right? You want to really build this thing fast and get it out. The second thing is that if you're actually looking at language systems, the technology takes a very long time to build. It's not, you put this together, and you have something. The life cycle of an NLP or a speech system is much longer than a digital thing. So where, and so there are two parts to it. Ethnographical studies take time to do them properly, right? To get something really good out of it takes time. How do you convince the technologists that this is absolutely essential and something that's taking you 2 years to do is now going to take you 2.5 years, but it's going to be worth it? B is, at what point do you kind of intervene?
Yeah. So those are good questions. I wonder if I can just we can come back to this one, but let me just. Oh no, it's not. It's not for a while. Can I come back to them? Because I talk about the two different types of project. When I get to that, which is technology led and ethnography led, when I get to that slide, if I don't answer your, can you just remind me? I was going to skip forward, but I realise it's a bit of a way. But I'll talk about that a little bit, but I'll go into more detail to try and answer your questions. But Kalika is absolutely right. A good ethnography takes a very long time. We say it takes at least 3 times the time you spent in the field to do the analysis. And I think that's a gross underestimate. And then for something like, so it depends what your analysis is for. But say, for example, the consultancy project with the DWP, we did an 8-week study, and then we probably produced some results for the consultants and the Department of Work and Pensions within 2 months of that, which for them was a very long time. For us, it was very short. And we would say that we hadn't even started the analysis by the time we presented them the report, because what they needed to know was much higher level. It was about, the glue that sticks the work together, the types of things you're going to have to do if you want to remove paper. It was at a much higher level. There wasn't the same deep analytic insights that actually are really important in systems design, and particularly, I think, in NLP and speech systems, because I think almost the place that ethnographers have the strongest potential to influence AI is on a bit of a deeper level, rather than a more surface, hey, here's some technology you could build that could solve this problem. And you're right, technologists don't want to wait. I'll talk about that for sure. So the analytic approach I mentioned that I use is ethnomethodology, and it's different from traditional sociology. We're not interested in building sociological theories. We're interested in understanding the world in great detail, and that actually is very useful for systems design, because I don't think there are that many theories that have helped anyone build a system, okay? Except really high-level theories that, how helpful was it? I don't know. You just wrote your paper saying that framed it. If you want to build theories, don't do ethnomethodology. There are other methods to do. You can still do ethnography. And people do build theories out of ethnography. If you want to design technology, ethnomethodology is very useful, because it really is about how the world comes to look like it does, and what it looks like, and then what might happen if you intervene with that is a logical next step. So data analysis is inductive. You should not be going in with hypotheses, okay? You shouldn't be going in with hypotheses about what's going on in the world. See what's going on in the world. Let your data speak to you. And often the things, I mentioned this before, often the things that are most important and most interesting are not the things that you think are going to be most important and most interesting, okay? And that's a problem. So for this call center where I'm going, they've just sent me their contextual inquiry they did somewhere else, and I'm not even going to read it till I've been in, because I don't want to know what their hypotheses are. If I find the same things as they hypothesize, then that's fantastic, because that's come out of the data. That's let the data speak. Look for patterns in the data, okay? One of the things, and this is why the data is not the same as that anecdote you tell me about riding an auto. It's because what we're reporting is patterns that we see again and again, okay? One of the things that ethnography is not good for, and if you're going to build a system on the basis of it in a commercial way, rather than addressing a research problem, you may want to then go and do some big quantitative study, is it can tell you how important something is to the people who are doing that work. It can tell you that it happens regularly. It can't tell you how widespread something is and how much of a cost saving you're going to get from addressing it. For that, you need to go in with other methods. And actually, I become more and more interested in how you can combine big quantitative stuff and qualitative stuff. Previously, what's typically happened is someone's done a really big quantitative study and then they've said, we know this is a problem. So there was a voice of a customer study about print machines. These were Xerox's massive print machines, £1 million to $1 million to buy these machines. They were meant to be the best color machines ever. And all the customers were like, we hate these machines. The color's not very good. So they knew there was a problem. They knew it was a really big problem for them. They had no idea why. So we went and did a study, first of all, of print shops, then of graphic design houses, because we found that it was actually, the problem was originating down the train. And then we could tell them why the problem had arisen, okay? So that the combination of things can actually be quite useful. But we use key stories. So this is why we often get called anecdotal, because we often represent the patterns with key stories, because that's a good way of communicating to people. And it's actually one of the pluses for using video. I have to say, there is nothing like showing a technologist a piece of video of something for them to believe you that people really can't use whatever it is they built. Okay? And we're doing a study right now looking at the accessibility of Ola and Uber for visually impaired people. And we will get some video, we're getting screen recordings of them trying to use it so that we can show Ola. So we can say, look, I bet you have never seen a visually impaired person trying to book a cab on your system. And I believe that that will probably have more impact than 100 presentations that we can do. The analytic stance you should take is the participant's perspective. So this again goes back to not hypothesizing. Do not assume that the people in the setting are idiots because they can't use your technology. The people in the setting are experts at whatever it is that they're doing in that setting, okay? If they can't use your technology, that's because you've designed it wrong, okay? So go in and take their perspective. Try and understand the world from their perspective. What are their orientations and concerns? What are they up to? What are they doing? And why are they doing it like that? Why did they do that and then that? So really get to the nitty-gritty of what people are doing. And some analytic techniques, again, this is because data analysis is really hard. I have to say this. This isn't something that you can learn very easily. It only comes over practice and time. And what you're typically, the first time you analyze some data, it will probably be very surface, and it will probably contain a load of your own biases or your own hypotheses. And you have to learn to, and that's again why we do data analysis always in groups. It's really important to have groups of people to do data analysis. But things to ask yourself is where? What kind of place is this? Okay, what kind of place is this? This, right now, is a lecture room. What makes it a lecture room? The furniture, the people, the interaction, all of these things make it what it is. What type of place is that? That's a cafeteria. Is it always a cafeteria? Well, no, sometimes it might be an events hall. So you can look at the different ways things are and what makes them what they are. When? What time of day it is? What time of history is it? What time in the process or whatever it is you're looking is it? And how much does that matter? What are the consequences of different times? And I should say you apply all of these to any setting. It's a good way to go through and really ask yourself, so who is like what kinds of people are present? So what are their roles? So you've got demographic information, that's one thing about what kind of people are present, but what are their roles? What are they doing? How do you know they are? How do you know that's the doctor? How do you know that's the nurse? How do you know that's the technician? What is the technician doing? What's the doctor doing? How do they relate to one another in like hierarchy and so on, which is exhibited through the interaction. Because doctors are typically higher in a hierarchy higher than nurses, but at times the nurses override the doctors. So that's really important. So don't take your preformed idea of what the structures are. Take what's happening in the setting. What's happening? Do people use any artifacts and technologies? And how? How are the people doing their work? How does the world come to look like this? And that's probably the hardest one, and that's the one that takes the most work. But if you can do all of these well, you're probably on a good starting point. Oh, so I talk about CA before I talk about different types of projects, sorry. Okay, I need to speed up a bit. So this one, I was talking to Indrani and she was saying, oh, stick some stuff in about CA because it's probably very relevant to people. If you're designing any sort of conversational interface or technology, this is really useful to know about. It's a method for analysing spoken conversation, but that spoken conversation is transcribed with using particular rules to analyse it. CA techniques can also be used for analysing text interactions, so forums, text chat, instant messaging, WhatsApp. Okay, and there's a whole set of people, including us, who've done stuff in this area. And then there's also interaction analysis, which is typically video, and it includes all the non-verbal parts of communication as well as the verbal parts. And it's particularly good for analysing human-robot interaction. And there was this lovely little paper at CHI in 2016 in a session that I was chairing where they used CA to analyse people interacting with one of those now robots. So CA was started by Harvey Sachs. It's a detailed examination of conversation. And CA and ethnomethodology are very closely related. He looks at turn-taking, story-taking, all sorts of things. So very minute bits of conversation and bigger bits of interaction. And the idea is to understand how our ordinary conversations produce coherently and how our participants' utterances made mutually intelligible. We don't just talk garbled nonsense. Okay, we talk things that you understand, that if you're exhibiting through either speech acts or your face that you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm probably going to change that. All speech is reflexive. So, for example, if I'm talking to somebody, I might say, oh, she's going to pick up Alfie, okay? That makes sense if you know that who she is. It makes sense if you know who Alfie is, okay? Alfie is my youngest son. She might be my sister-in-law. It might be the nanny. Or I might say Vina is going to pick up Alfie. That makes sense if you know who Vina is and you know who Alfie is. Or I might say, it's okay because my nanny is going to pick up my son Alfie, okay? If you don't know who Alfie is and you don't know who Vina is, okay? So there's all these different ways, and we just do it all the time. We design our talk according to what we assume people understand. And of course, we sometimes make mistakes, but then that's easily rectified. It's a normal, natural trouble. Somebody looks a bit confused, or they say, well, who's Vina? Or they say, why do I care? Or and then you adjust your talk to fit with that. Okay? And as humans, we do this all the time really well and really easily. Okay? Now, conversation analysis did start as a much wider sort of study of naturalistic observation of conversation, and it has become more and more focused in recent years on the structure of talk, but that's still important for you. Because if you're going to build AI and chatbots, they really need to know some of the rules of how to structure talk, otherwise it's just going to seem weird. Conversations follow rules, okay? That is, they are orderly, and one of the things that CA did was it describe what the rules are. However, when we say it follows rules, rules can be broken. I can say whatever I want whenever I want it, okay? But my utterance is understood in relation to the rules. So, A simple rule is one greeting is properly responded by another. Hi, hey. Ça va, ça va. How are you? Hey, good. Hi. Or hi, and then nobody says anything, okay? That's accountable. That absence is accountable, okay? Or hi, and someone says, bugger off, okay? That's accountable. That's not the usual response. It's not, people can say whatever they want, but the understanding of it is in the light of the rules, okay? And it's important to say this because obviously when you say conversation follows rules, then people are like, I don't know, I can say whatever I want whenever I want, but it's accountable. One of the things that Sachs did and ethnomethodologists did, which is very funny, is they sent their students out to do what's called breaching experiments. So to prove that things are organized by rules, they would send them out to deliberately break those rules in public places. And it's a good exercise to try if you want, because it's really interesting to see the responses that you get once you've broken the rule. So basic CA concepts, I won't talk about this too much, look up. Turn taking was one of the really big ones that they spent a lot of time looking at. So one person speaks at once, overlaps are kept to a minimum. Doesn't mean to say we don't overlap, we often do, but they're managed, they're kept to a minimum. And there's transition relevance places. So there's points where you swap turns, okay? And there's actually an organized system for changing turns. I won't go into what it is. Again, read Sachs, read Schlegeloff if you want to know. How do we know what a turn is? Pauses, tone, end of sentence, grammar, non-verbal cues. All of these say, I've come to the end of my tone. And one of the things that's really interesting that doesn't happen when you're interacting with a machine is that we predict exactly when a turn's going to end pretty well. If you record conversation, there's almost no pauses between turns. In fact, there's tiny overlaps quite often. And it's really interesting because that's our natural fluid conversation because we can predict it, which machines typically can't. There's adjacency pairs, so that's your greeting, question, answer. Things come in pairs. The first half is typically followed by the second half. Preference organization is basically there's a projected response. So, for example, an affirmation typically comes quicker than a no. So if there's a question, the typical, if someone's going to say no, it's not that they can't say no, but there's more of a pause. And so you see that there's a preference, that's what's called preference, there's a preference for affirmation.
And all these can be broken, right? So, for example, I remember doing a study as a grad student where we studied women conversation in a group, and taking the way different women tend to overlap and interrupt a lot more, and they feel comfortable, they actually feel good about it, whereas men actually don't like that.
Yes.
Again, for preference organization, if somebody says no, immediately it's perceived as rude. And if I say, will you do this for me? And you say no. Or would you be able to do something? And you say, no, I won't be able to. It's perceived as rude because you're breaking this.
Exactly.
It goes back to Jackie's point that there are rules, and when the rules are broken, you better pay attention why the rules are being broken.
Yes.
Because that carries a lot of information.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's repair. So we're always like, getting confused, messing things up. I tell you the thing about Rena, and you're like, who? I'll repair that. It's just normal. It's not, when we say repair, it's not like it's a big major breakdown. It's just a small thing that we just do all the time. Okay. Talk is sequentially organized. This should be obvious, of course. We listen to what people say and we use that in what we say next. And there's some interesting ways, like Sachs looks at ways people change topic. It's really, I have to say, of all the CA people, Sachs is my favorite because he writes in a very accessible way. His lectures were published posthumously because he was killed in a car crash in the 70s. But he's really accessible, whereas some of the later conversation analysis is just a bit boring because it's really the details of turn taking. But that's still potentially relevant for you. If you're interested in a turn taking system, it's pretty important to understand this stuff. Okay? We make predictions about what people are going to understand. That's what I've just been talking about. And we take into account previous turns for its sense, and each turn protects restrictions on what you can say next, which again, you can completely break. You can completely break, but that breaking is accountable. And you see that in chatbots, actually. Chatbots often break what you would expect the next turn to be, and that's one of the things. So one of the things that I've seen people do when they're designing chatbots is to try and do it humorously. Because if you do it humorously, it's more easily brought into conversation and conversational practice than if you're just like, why did what? You know? And you see it also as the thing like, you know, I've said something to the chatbot. I sort of expect it to say something back, but it doesn't. Or, you know, changes the topic. All of these things are one of the reasons why chatbots feel a bit weird when you're talking to them. And just analysing them, you will quickly pick up on why. So, there's also ethnomethodologically informed analysis of talk rather than just CA. And the difference is, so you don't really need to know the difference, okay? Unless you're going to get into one of these big debates between the CA people and the ethno people, okay? Which you don't want to do because they're grumpy people, okay? But CA is basically interested in how the talk gets done, and ethnomethodology is interested in what work gets done through the talk. So, and both are useful for you designing things that are going to talk to people. You have to do both, okay? So look at this. This is a troubleshooting call center. The customer's just reported that there's lines on the page. It's for a photocopy machine. He said there's lines on the page. Right, and does it happen on both the glass and the top feeder? Customer, I didn't confirm this problem. Okay, I tell you what, are you near the machine yourself, Caroline? Could you just do a little test for me? That's my emphasis, okay? And the customer, okay. So, CA would look at turn taking. It would look at question answer. It would look at question and answer affirmation. It would look at, you couldn't do CA on this because I haven't done all the pauses and everything like that. With CA, you have to annotate all the pauses, ups and downs in breath and stuff like that. CA would be interested in the structure. What we're interested as ethnomethodologists is in what the work is being done. So what you see here, what you only see because this is an example of a pattern that we've seen a lot. Customers ring the call center. They often don't want to troubleshoot. It's the troubleshooter's job to persuade them to do the machine. What you see here, you see a question, and you see a customer. That could be seen as a pre-refusal. It's a first move towards refusing. The customer is denying any responsibility for that problem. I didn't confirm this problem. You know, it's like, I'm just ringing you up. Like, okay? But then what does the troubleshooter do next? This is very clever, and we see it all the time. They use interactional means to persuade an unwilling customer to troubleshoot. Okay, Caroline, using first names, okay? And then, could you just do a little test for me? Okay? Preference organisation says that's really damn hard to refuse, okay? And we saw it all the time. The troubleshooters do it all the time. It's one of the things that they do that a chatbot or an online system can't do, okay? So that's the difference between an so ethnomethodology is interested in what work's going on. What are they doing in what they're saying? And CA is interested in structure, and both are important for you. So, ethnomethodology helps you see the hidden, taken for granted work that's done in any human-to-human interaction that you may want to replicate. If you're trying to have your bot to be a bit like a human or to do some of the work of a human, such as in a call center, you need to understand how people do it. Your bot doesn't have to do it like people do it, but if you understand how people do it, that already gives you a better framework. It also might outline different design problems than the one you think you're designing for, which might help you produce better bots. CA, so conversation analysis, interaction analysis, and ethnomethodology, analysis of human and AI interaction. So once you've got some bot and it's interacting with people, you can use any of these methods, and that will help you reveal the strengths and weaknesses of whatever it is you've built and help you design better for the next time. So this is what do I do with all this stuff? Is the bit I'm about to get to, the different types of studies. So the aim is to understand the detail of how the work's achieved so we can use that as a resource for design, okay? Design is necessarily creative, okay? You're going to change something. You're not going to recreate it electronically. We don't want to recreate it electronically. We want to do something better. So then once you've understood what the problem is, you might come up with some design concepts. You'll sit together, you'll have a brainstorm, and you'll think, what would I design? What would help these people do what they're trying to do better? Or even stop them needing to do this at all and get straight on with something else, okay? And then prototype design should be iterative. So you design something based on the ethnography, and then you go back and you test it, and you test it from the earlier stages. You know, Najani was talking about user testing. Get out there as soon as you can, as soon as you have an idea. Like, try and mock it up. Take it out to the field, and you will find that it changes and changes, because your study can't tell you how the technology is going to be really adapted once it's in place. And what we find is by doing really small, so we're not talking about the types of studies Indrani was talking about to publish. You might go out and just talk to 4 people or 5 people, and you can see that there's already a problem. And then you might go and change so you have to be careful about what you're changing on the basis of 4 or 5 people. But even just seeing how 4 or 5 people, if they can't use, quite often what happens, what you've designed is not usable. And they'll give you ideas for how to make it more usable. And then typically, you then build up to having more users. You might do a 20-user study or something like that. And then typically, by the time you get to having your prototype out there, they should at least be able to use it, okay? Which is like the first step to then everything else. So types of project. So this is the answer. There are ethnography-led projects. Do them. As an ethnographer, I would say that, okay? So the one way to get rid of the timeline thing is you do ethnography-led projects. And so that means that you're doing the ethnography first, and then you're doing the design based on the ethnography. They reveal opportunities for design. So the auto rickshaw driver app that we're building right now, that we're hopefully going to deploy next week, is based on an ethnographic study, and then a very, very iterative design process. It's changed quite a lot. The basic concepts have remained the same. How the app looks has changed enormously in the 6 months or 8 months. It can help make existing practice better, and it can create new practice, okay? Technology-led projects. So these are the toughies. These are the ones that Kalika is asking me about. I've done a number of these, and they're quite hard, particularly when you're building something. So if the best time to intervene is at concept stage, okay? The designer has a concept of what they want to do. You can help them understand whether it makes sense. The one thing you have to say, people would often come to me and say, I've got this great idea. Can you do some, see if the users will like it or whatever. Like, people have a very strange idea of what I do. And I'm always like, well, I can, but they might tell you I might come back and tell you it's a really rubbish idea and it's not going to work at all. Are you prepared for that? Okay? But in reality, it's very, very hard to do this when you've got a group of technology people who already have a technology idea and are rolling ahead of it. So there's actually a paper that we did for Co-op, which was about a banking project. And the technology people had this idea for this banking stuff, and then they wanted some user validation. And so there was an ethnography done in parallel, and that's the title of the paper, actually, Ethnography in Parallel, that was done in parallel. And basically, all their concepts were wrong. But unfortunately, they built a second prototype by the time that we could tell them, So that's a problem. But then you hope that they learn, because that didn't work. And we tell them exactly why it didn't work. But unfortunately, if they'd waited 3 months, they could have designed something that would have worked. But they don't. What can you do? Laugh at them.
So have people done ethnographic studies on technologists who design?
Yes. So no, I haven't, but you probably could. So the question actually, what I'm coming to think with technology-led stuff is the way, so it depends. If it's a really long project, so one of the good things about the AI project, as in taking AI as a whole thing and chatbots for call center, is it is a long project. They're going to be doing things, they're going to be implementing them, they're not going to work. Okay, so it's not like where you have a really rapid design cycle. You might have a rapid design cycle for their bot, but they'll put it out and it won't work. So I can go along and do my ethnography in my own time and then still be useful for them because they're going to have other iterations. So that's one of the reasons why the AI project is actually quite a good one. The other place you can intervene is, I've done tons of studies of call centers. Okay, I have quite a deep knowledge of what work in a call center is, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So I can already help them without studying their specific call center by giving them some ideas of where the problem points are, where the stress points are. So that's another way which just comes from experience, which is using previous experience and previous studies as a guiding thing, which isn't quite the same as doing a study to help design. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Ethnography-led projects. Yes.
There's something about design repetition which comes from, I think, spending a lot of time in it.
Yes.
And you don't necessarily have to go out to this particular call center to understand problems. Because you spend time in all these other call centers.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
This helps to
yes.
spend time in the field.
But it's one of the, I have to say, it's one of the reasons why chatbots, why AI is such an interesting area, because you know that it's like, yes, they're going to be rushing things out now, but that thing's not going to work very well. We're a long way off from having fantastic, excellent AI. We all know that. None of us are under the illusions that's the case. So there's lots of opportunities for us to keep feeding in, particularly as I think the fundamental understandings for AI and conversation and interaction are quite fundamental. They're not really, oh, design it like this, make it look like this. There are those interactions and they're important too, but there's some really fundamental things. And I want to just illustrate it. Sure. Yes.
Language technology to mature, or even come to a point where you can actually do a chatbot on top of it. So the chatbot for most language technologists is a layer on top, right? There's actually a lot of deep stuff that needs to be done before that to put a chatbot. Now, you can't really study a chatbot and human interaction until all that work is done, and that work takes years to do properly, right? I mean, we can put something together for something, even putting something together takes at least half a year to do, right? So, in that case, what would you suggest? That study human-human conversations?
Yes. I think so. That would be my typical for that, because what you're wanting to do is create that good language resource underneath. And if you can understand even what the strengths and weaknesses are, or even are there ways to tweak your resource so that it does more of the things that people do. And the thing is, it's not that you're trying to recreate what people do. I think that's because we're not going to do that. That's false. But by understanding what people do, it can inspire you. So when I'm saying that design is creative, it can really inspire you to maybe think about the problem in a different way and maybe change. You know, I don't have a really good answer for you, but I think really a deep understanding of how human conversation works is already a good resource. And one of the things, so I'm going to give this project, I think is quite relevant to this. It's not so much a project. This is my critique of AI in call centers, okay? And I think that it's useful because this was actually a study I did a long time ago, but they're tackling the same problem. But they were tackling the same problem with a very different solution in mind. What they wanted then was they wanted people to use the online knowledge base to look up their troubles before they started troubleshooting the machine. Now, they want people to use chatbots to help solve their problems. And there's this idea that chatbots will be able to do it much better than people searching an online system. But the online system remains the same. And the online system, as I will show, is not an adequate resource for helping people solve their problems. And I suspect that not that I have hypotheses, I suspect that one of the reasons that people are not using the AI in the call center I'm going to look at is because of some of these reasons. It will be interesting to see whether that's the case. It might be something completely different. But let me just talk through this example. I'm just going to give the one because I'm running out of time. Okay, so call centers and AI, seductive dream. As long as I've been doing research and AI has come back into favor, because it was obviously in a big cloud for many years, and then suddenly it's gone, yes, we love AI. Pardon?
It's still on cloud.
Yeah. People are like, oh, we can use call centers. We put AI in call centers, okay? Even the crappy AI we have right now, we can stick it in call centers, okay? This is going to be fantastic. And I would argue, no, I'm on recording, I'll talk about this later. Call centers might seem to be an ideal setting for AI systems, even the ones that don't work so well now, because it's low-skill work. It's low-skill work. Repetitious inquiries. People keep ringing up about the same thing again and again and again and again. So that's really easy then, isn't it? They're costly, so you can save a lot of money. So it's like where you're going to have a financial impact really quickly. And they're really frustrating for customers. Okay, customers hate ringing call centers. They often don't have their problem solved. It seems like a perfect setting. However, the expected success has not materialized. And I've seen many call center AI projects crash and burn. No one listens to me. I don't know why. However, and this is my reading of it, it's an underestimation. The proponents of AI for call centers massively underestimate the amount of everyday common sense, human interactional skill that goes into being a successful call center operator. It seems to be low skill because this is all stuff we do without thinking about it. We are all experts in conversation. Unfortunately, it's those taken for granted human skills that make call centers low-skill work for operators, for people, that are exactly what's hardest for machines. It's all about semantics. Machines don't do semantics. They do calculation. Okay? We can do amazing things with calculation. We will be able to do even more amazing things with calculation as time goes on. We will never do meaning. Okay? So I want to, if you don't believe me, I want to just give you an illustration of this troubleshooting call center that I've been talking about. Okay? We did a 3-week ethnographic study, 2 different people, of the copy and print machines. We recorded all the calls while we're sitting with the operators. We observed what they did. We also did in-lab testing of the online help system that had been released that no one was using. So we couldn't go out and watch customers use it because they weren't. So we got people to come into the lab and try and solve machine problems using the online system. And we did an analysis of the system logs from the few people who were using the system. At this stage, I mean, this shows you how long ago. At this stage, almost no one was using the online system. Okay? The hidden work of troubleshooting. So people think the troubleshooting people think that being call center operator is really, really low skill. But when you actually look in detail at what people do, you find they do the following things that the online knowledge base does not do. Okay, they work up the problem. Customers do not come to the call center with a fully articulated description of what the problem is. Okay, they come with a partial description of what the problem is, and then in interactional terms with the call center operator, they establish a fuller description of the problem so that they can solve it. And one thing I should say is that the call center operators also had this online system, and they were meant to use it. Okay? The process was they were meant to search for every single one of the customer's queries in that online knowledge base, and then they had to enter a code from that into the management system to prove that they'd done it. Okay? Because the people management thought that the system was better than the experts of their operators, but they also had machines on the floor. So the machines they were troubleshooting, they had on the floor. So they could go to the different machines, and also they had their wireless phones. It's not so long ago. They could also mess around with the machines. Okay, so they work up the problem. They translate between the customers and the organizational language. Okay? Customers have whole different ways of talking about things. The language in the knowledge base is an organizational way of talking about things. It's not especially technical, although there are some technical aspects, but it is technical in that it's the organization's way of describing things. Customers do not describe them in that way, and customers' language is not one thing. all sorts of different customers will describe different things in different ways, okay? And they don't just translate what the customer says into the language of the knowledge base, they translate the knowledge base language into the language of the customers. And one of the things that we saw when people were using the online system is sometimes they would get the right results from their search, but they didn't know they got the right results. They just disregarded them because they didn't understand that they were the right results. A person mediates this. Okay. So to give you an example, copy machine is stapling wrong. Does it put them in the wrong place? So that's a short pause. What's happening? Tell me. It staples the wrong batches and in the wrong place, you know. Yep, I do know, Les. I know very well. It's not really collating properly. So he works up the problem. Copy machine is stapling wrong was the first report. What does wrong mean? Like, you're not going to find a copy machine stapling wrong. That's not in the knowledge base. Okay? He works it up and he translates between the customer language and collating. Not really collating properly, which is quite a technical term. They also adapt the session to the customer's exhibited knowledge. They don't talk to all customers in the same way. So not just the terms that they use, but also how they give instructions, whether they tell you in tiny, tiny detail about everything you have to do, or whether they give you bigger instructions. There's a problem with the zero graphic module. That's a customer who probably knows what they're talking about. Okay? They might not. And as the interaction went on, if the troubleshooter found that, they would adapt their terms again to give more detail. The damn machine doesn't work, okay? These are different actual reports. And how are you going to search in the knowledge base for that? And how the knowledge base is not adapted to people's different knowledge. Okay, the knowledge base also gives sets of answers for generic problems. This problem the customer has is the problem here and now. And so the troubleshooter situates their instructions in the here and now. They tell them according to what they've just done, what they've just reported, what they should do next, using the language adapted to their experience and translating between the organizational language. Online knowledge bases don't do that. If you want to design a chatbot for troubleshooting call center, you need your chatbot to be able to do all of these things. And they might say that you can work up a problem because it has interactional terms, but if they're not the right interactional terms, you're not going to get anywhere. Persuading the customers to troubleshoot, we saw this. That's really important, okay? Because we saw again and again the number of people who really didn't want to do anything. And it's also really important, one of the things troubleshooters do is they're exhibiting their knowledge and their expertise. Because you're phoning a call center, you've all had bad experiences with call centers. You don't necessarily trust the person on the end of the line to be giving you the right instructions. So they exhibit accordingly. You know, if they see that you're falling off, they will explain to you, or you don't understand, why should I do that? They will explain to you, for example, there's a paper jam, but there's no paper, why should I have to clean it? And then they'll explain to you that the sensors get dirty. And so then it thinks there's a paper jam. So you have to clean the machine. Cleaning the machine is not just a random thing I'm telling you, because I tell everyone that, okay? It's to do with your problem. And then the knowledge base versus knowledge. So troubleshooters are meant to use the knowledge base for every single inquiry, and it's built into their system. They have to use it at least to get the code. They don't use it for the majority of time to answer the questions of the customers. They use their knowledge, they ask their colleagues, they go to the machine on the floor, okay? Sometimes they will use the knowledge base, but the knowledge base does not have, it's difficult to search, basically, even for the troubleshooters who are experts in searching at it. They often know the instructions. They're going to have to change the instructions anyway because they have to situate them in the interaction and according to the person's expertise. It's just quicker not to use it. The main use of the knowledge base, apart from getting that code to put in the call management system, was sometimes they will do it to remind themselves. So rather than going into any of the things, they'll just do a quick search and they'll see all the different things it could be. And that will remind them of some of the steps to go through. And so I'm going to finish on this one. So, is it low-skill work? No. Really, really, really not low-skill work when you think that it's a machine who's now going to do it, and machines don't do this stuff very well. Okay? Is it repetitious inquiries? Not really. Sure, if you look at the customer management system, 1 minute. Okay. yes, they're all classified as paper jam, paper jam, paper jam, paper jam, paper jam. But if you look at all the different things that were ended up being classified as paper jam, particularly since they're often just entering the code they can remember because they have to enter one in the CMS, then, and all the different ways that paper jam was reported, and all the different expertise you needed to solve that paper jam, they're not the same thing. Just because your CMS says that you have 5 million paper jams, those paper jams are like, I don't know, probably 3 million different things, okay? Frustrating for customers? Yes, it is frustrating for customers. But do you know why? It's frustrating for customers because the systems that people end up using, this was actually a good call center that wasn't frustrating for customers, but in many other call centers, they restrict the agent from doing all that work that agents are so good at because they make you use a stupid system that you have to follow, that they have no agency to solve your problem. So actually, it's usually the technology that makes it frustrating for the customers, and then they de-skill the workers and de-skill the workers, and then you end up in a big mess. So one thing to remember is the knowledge base alone does not encompass the resolution of customers' problems. So you can build the best chatbot in the world on top of the knowledge base, but that's not necessarily going to help. So you need to think about what other resources you can pull in and what other things you can do, such as maybe recording customer person interaction and trying to replicate that. If you think about troubleshooting your own devices using online, often the best solutions you find, particularly if you're non-technical like me, is somebody else had that problem, they asked a question, and a person answered them, yes? Rather than a support knowledge base, which isn't going to necessarily help me. All that information is probably in a support knowledge base somewhere, but it's not going to help me. So these are resources you can use. And only if you understand and acknowledge the human skill in full detail can you begin to create something that may recreate it. So thank you.